who sheltered activists, supported exiles, and helped sustain the liberation struggle. And one such place was number 43 Trelawney Park in Eswatini, known as KwaMagogo. The home became a refuge for anti-apartheid activists and a vital link in the broader struggle for freedom. The story is captured in the memoir number 43, Trelawney Park, KwaMagogo, written by economist and author Elias Masilela, who grew up in the house and witnessed its extraordinary role in history. Well, today, as South Africa commemorates Youth Day and reflects on the challenges facing a new generation, from unemployment and inequality to social division and migration tensions, we ask what lessons the youth of today can draw from those who came before them. Joining us is economist, author, and former Chief Executive Officer of South Africa's Public Investment Corporation, Elias Masilela. So good to talk to you again, my brother. It's been a while.
Peter, it's been a while indeed. I would even swear you still exist.
So, 50 years on, what gains do you think have been made, not only for the youth of South Africa, but the rest of the continent, because it is the Day of the African Child?
Indeed, you know, it's a very mixed consideration to answer your question, because it depends on which perspective you're answering it from. But a statement that I would want to start off with is a statement made by the president of Burkina Faso, who said, Africa would not have achieved if we don't get to the point where the African girl child stops worrying about their future. That, for me, I think is a very important statement to ponder on. But answering your question more specifically, there's a lot to celebrate by South African youth, but there's a lot for them to understand, to the effect that for any change to happen, they need to exert themselves to making sure that the change actually does happen. The students of 1976 were exemplary of that. They actually showed that without them deciding to walking out of class and going onto the streets, things would not have changed in South Africa. And that, for me, was the biggest change that has been recorded in the history of South Africa's liberation process. So the biggest lesson is that the youth of today need to understand that they cannot wait for handouts. They need to roll up their sleeves and make sure that things that they want to see happening do happen. And they'll only happen if they are involved. If they don't get involved, they'll end up consuming outcomes of decisions made elsewhere, which may not necessarily match their interests.
So, for listeners across the continent who may not be familiar with it, what was number 43 Trelawney Park or KwaMagogo, and why did it become such an important part of the anti-apartheid struggle?
Ironically, the house was set up to raise a family. And the starting point of setting up that house in Swaziland was a protest against Bantu education, where our parents, knowing how difficult it is or was then for them to run a household without an education, they decided to leave South Africa because they did not want their children to be exposed to the kind of education that was being considered and having been enacted by the regime at the time. They went to Swaziland, which was one of the countries that had better educations in the region, and that would be Swaziland, Botswana, Lesotho, and to a large extent, Zimbabwe. So landing up in Swaziland, running this household, this was 1965. 11 years later, there was the Soweto Uprising. And we were surprised as a family. A few days later, after June 16, we started receiving tens of children at our doorstep, all with the same message. Ubaba, umama, ugogo, umkhulu sent me here.
Wow.
They said, Mtwanam, hamba uye Eswatini, uthole KwaMasilela. They will know what to do. That baffled us. We did not know what originated that trend. But looking back, our father, Uptongo, was a bricklayer in Soweto. Most of the houses that you see standing in Soweto today were built by him or extended by him. So everybody knew him. When he left for Swaziland, in the mind of the average Sowetan, Masilela must be a politician. Masilela must be ANC. Masilela must be going to Swaziland to set up shop for the ANC. Why? It's because that coincided with the Rivonia trial. And only then did we realize why we're ending up with all these students. And despite the fact that it was risky, our parents took that risk until freedom was realized in South Africa to house all the people that left South Africa for exile and all those who came back to fight. And if you read the TRC report very well, it will show that over 80% of operations of the ANC went through Swaziland. What that tells you is that over 80% of the operations could have, may have, actually it's argued by a lot of people that they were planned, launched, and celebrated in number 43. And that's one of the reasons that the book relating to the story was published in 2007. And that was under the instigation of the children of Elias Masilela, who said, guys, you don't know the history that you're sitting on. And if you don't document it, it will die with you. And that's how we ended up writing the story of number 43.
So you've written about the idea of Magogoism. How would you define it? And maybe um, why do you believe that it remains relevant in a continent facing growing social and economic pressures today?
Very important. Let's start with the definition. And this definition is a very simple one, defining how we grew up. And the definition of Magogoism is the spirit of giving and sharing selflessly. And this is a lesson that was handed to us by our parents, who would always remind us all the time that what we own does not belong to us only. It needs to be shared. And uMagogo, our mother, used to say, Bantwabam, nibokwazi ukuthi abantwana bomuntu bahlephulelana inhloko yentethe. Now, it's going to be very difficult to translate this, but all it means is people in the olden days would rely on locusts as a basis of sustenance. So what that means is even in your poverty, even when you don't have anything to share, as a responsible member of the family, you will understand that if the only thing that you're left with is the head of a locust, you should be prepared to share it with other people. So we grew up knowing that our house is a shared asset, our father is a shared asset, our mother is a shared asset, everything was shared. So post 1976, we would on average be hosting over 40 people in the house, all being clothed, housed, and fed by a salary of a bricklayer. And that is what defined us, and that is what continues to define us today. And to us, it's important to see number 43 as existing side by side with June 16. We call these two institutions the Siamese twins. And Siamese twins because they originated from the same source, and that source being Bantu education. And they collided in exile, where number 43 became almost the reception house for all the people who left South Africa through Swaziland to the rest of the world. Now, the concept of Magogoism then says to us, even though liberation has been attained, we still have a responsibility to make sure that we uplift those who are less fortunate than us. As we grow economically as individuals, we need to learn that that value that we're developing or generating needs to find a way back to society, one way or the other. Peter.
So the Soweto generation, 76, they were quite clear about the political cause that they were marching behind. I wonder nowadays, whilst the suffering is the same, unemployment, you name it, they're all facing the same thing. But do you think that they are as united politically in terms of how to deal with these issues? And could that be the lesson of the 76 generation?
Yeah, Peter, that's a very difficult question for me to answer. I've been asked that question many times, and many times I've struggled to provide a comprehensive and balanced answer to it. But the simplest answer that I can give to it is the ANC of yesteryear is very different to the ANC of today. We're very focused in exile, or they were focused in exile. I always say my parents were in exile. I always enjoyed life. But they were focused in exile, and they actually were committed to the cause. I remember one evening where KwaMagogo, we had different people from different organizations, whether PAC or the ANC, with Black Consciousness Movement, all under one roof. I don't think it's easy to envision a situation like that today. And they were fighting amongst themselves for whatever reason. And Umagogo came out of the bedroom and said to them, Bantu Abam, I am not going to have this fighting from you anymore. There's one cause that brought you here, and that is the cause of liberating South Africa. And that is what is going to keep you under this roof. If you continue fighting the way you are and not form a common cause, stop coming here. That was the end of the fighting. I'm not sure if you can have the same instruction today. And part of it, I think, is because when we came back home, materialism took over. We may not have been driven by the cause, we've been driven by self-centeredness, trying to enrich individuals. And you can see from the shift in focus, the one thing that got us into exile fundamentally, the one thing that triggered the June 16, 1976 uprising was education. What you would have expected is that when we came back home, we would have focused all our efforts in improving the education of our people and making sure that they are competitive across the world. But when you look at the quality of education that we're enjoying in South Africa, it has deteriorated further from where we were in 1994. And that is very concerning. And this is not me just saying that it's analysts. If you look at the allocation of resources, that is the fiscus as a proportion of GDP, directed at education, it competes with comparator countries and sometimes competes with more developed countries than South Africa. But when you look at the outcome of that investment, it is worrying. So I would say, having come back to South Africa, we have not focused on what we're supposed to focus on as we should have, and as dictated by the liberation process. And in my mind, I think we do need a refocus, and it is likely that we're going to get a similar impatience from the youth as the one we got in 1976. And I'm hoping that we can be able to roll up our sleeves quicker so that we don't get to that point.
All right, we've run out of time, but one final question. It's the Day of the African Child, and I just wonder how we can get our youth of today to think beyond their national borders and think of their Pan-African identity so that we have us against the world rather than us against each other.
It also goes back to conscientization. We need to get the youth involved in the decision making in the country. For them to be involved effectively, we need to educate and skill them. If we don't do that, they will feel that they're on the periphery. And the closer you bring them to decision-making process and them taking decisions to be effective in running the economy, you are not going to be able to achieve what you're talking about. So an illustration for me is an illustration coming out of the Russia invasion. When we realized that, and we got a very rude awakening of what our dependency for grain is, instead of the African Union turning around and saying, it seems like we're not going to be getting enough grain for where we're used to getting it. Can we pull together all the resources that we have as a continent to invest in agriculture and make sure that we produce all the grain that we need and we're self-sufficient? Instead, we sent our heads of state to Russia with begging bowl in hand. And I think that for me is a psyche that needs to change. It's a psyche that says we need to see ourselves as a continent as independent of the world in terms of economic well-being. Currently, we're over-dependent on the world, and we don't think in an investment fashion that when we see a challenge, we see a problem that we cannot resolve. We don't see an opportunity to put resources into it and turning it around. And that psyche for me needs to change, and it needs to filter down to the youth. If you send a message to the youth that we're a failing economy, failing continental economy, where will they look at? They'll look at the rest of the world instead of looking home.
Elias,
Peter?
always great talking to you, always being inspired by your words. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on this very important day and sharing your reflections and thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciated.
Thank you so much. Elias Masilela speaking to us on the Day of the African Child, Youth Day in South Africa. It's time to find out what's happening in the world.